Hey, what's happening, y'all? It's me coming back at you again with another vid. Now, this video is a response to the Boxing Librarian, okay? Because I know he's been very vocal about this whole situation where champions were not held to a standard that that Anthony Joshua is being held to by quote unquote radical fans, whatnot, and he's arguing that Anthony Joshua 3.5 years as a pro is doing just fine, which I don't argue against. He is doing fine as a pro in his 3.5 years. He's done a tremendous job in his short 3 years, 3.5 years as a pro. All right, becoming a unified champion, knocked off a future Hall of Famer and former pound for pound fighter, a long reigning champion in Vladimir Klitschko, and picking up a title in his 16th pro fight against Charles Martin, and defeated from pretty good opponents in Dominic Brazil, whatnot. Eric Molina is a little bit debatable because Deontay Wilder defeated him as well. So yeah, that's up for debate. But at the same time, the argument is that he's making is that, well, thousands, 100,000, thousands of fighters were never subjected to the situation, to the standard that Anthony Joshua has been subjected to. Which is true. That is true. Thousands and thousands of fighters were not held to that standard that he's being held to right now as a champion, that some fans want him to be, that some fans hold him to. But nonetheless, there have been some fighters who are held to the standard that Joshua is being held to right now, long before he became a pro. And let's go down the list of fighters that I mentioned. You see these 5 fighters right here that's listed. You see Evander Holyfield. You see Oscar De La Hoya, Mike Tyson, Iron Mike, Ferocious Fernando Vargas, and Felix Tito Trinidad. I forgot to call out Evander Holyfield's alias name, The Real Deal, which he was definitely the real deal. And then you got the golden boy, Oscar De La Hoya. Okay, let's start with Evander Holyfield. All right. Evander Holyfield's career is very remarkable. Okay, nobody can dispute what he did in his career as a pro. There's hardly room for criticism. All you can say that Evander should not have fought after entering the age of 40 after he lost to John Ruiz in the trilogy fight. Actually, no. Was that a draw? Yeah, it was a draw. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was a draw. In the third fight, it was a draw for the WBA title. I've argued that Evander should have retired after that, because I just felt that there was no way for him to continue his career after he got to that. Yeah, it was a tough trilogy. It was not the greatest trilogy with him and Ruiz, but it was definitely a tough trilogy for him. But that's the only thing I would argue for Evander, is that why did you continue your career after that? And I wish that he would took on Razor Ruddock. So that's just the only room of criticism that you have for him. But anyways, let's look at his career. Oh, come on. As I was saying, so let's look at Evander Holyfield's career in his first 3 years as a pro, which is exactly 3 years and 4 months. Okay, he racked up wins against Lionel Bynum, Eric Wimbush, Fred Brown, Mark Rivera, Tyrone Booz, who was an undefeated prospect at the time, which is an interesting note that Tyrone Booz later on became a world champion. Okay, Rick Myers, Jeff Meacham, Anthony Davis, Chisanda Mute, Jesse Selvey, Terry Mims, and then in his 12th pro fight, he was thrown in here against Dwight Muhammad Qawi. Now, at that time, when I was young, there was people. I was overhearing a little argument with boxing fans at the time. My father, who was there at that point, and they were some of his friends. They were arguing the fact that after the Dwight Muhammad Qawi fight and the Evander Holyfield fight was announced, they were arguing back and forth about this, because they felt that Qawi was going to run over Evander Holyfield. They felt that Evander Holyfield was not ready for that fight. He was going to get steamrolled. The guy's career was going to end before it started. And then there was, some Evander Holyfield fans, like my father at the time was an Evander Holyfield fan. He was in a very heated discussion with some of his friends about whether Evander was ready for the fight or not. So eventually, besides the point, Evander, we all know the story about this fight. He was in a 15-round war, a fight that, many people felt that he was going to lose. And they felt that he was going to get knocked out because he ran out of gas, he ran out of steam in later in the fight, which he to his own admission, had said that he ran out of gas. That he, to me, I don't know how in the hell that he found the strength and wherewithal to finish that fight after the fact that he was getting hit with monster shots by Qawi. And I thought Qawi, when I looked at that fight, I thought Qawi was in verge of getting rid of him, getting him out of there. But Qawi couldn't finish it off. Very close fight. Probably the greatest, well, actually it is the greatest cruiserweight fight in history. Universally, people can't dispute that. And Evander came off a split decision win, which is at the point was the greatest win of his career at that point, because Qawi was a 2-division champion. He was, and of course, he's a proven fighter, has string of title defenses, and himself defeated a Hall of Famer himself in Matthew Saad Muhammad, and then went on to become a Hall of Famer himself. So after that, Evander went into defenses against went in there and got a voluntary defense against Mike Brothers. Fought a tough Henry Tillman, which y'all know about him, the guy who beat Mike Tyson in the amateur twice. Then unification bout with Ricky Parquet to capture the IBF Cruiserweight title. And then he had fought Ozzy Casio, another former champion, then rematched with Qawi, and then eventually unified with Carlos De Leon to capture the WBC and lineal cruiserweight titles at the same time. And Carlos De Leon, a 4-time champion and 1-time lineal champion as well, with 10 successful title defenses. So to cap off his career, 3 years and 4 months, Evander Holyfield was 18-0. He was with 14 KOs. He was an undisputed lineal cruiserweight champion. He defeated 1 lineal champion, defeated 5 world champions, and defeated a Hall of Famer. He did that all in 3 years and 4 months as a pro in a short period of time. This is in his 18 pro fights. Wow. Okay. So to me, right there, that shows that Evander Holyfield was held to that high standard at that time. And let me tell you why by some fans and some writers. Because at that time, when Evander Holyfield picked up that title after Dwight Muhammad Qawi, when he beat Mike Brothers, when he beat a tough fighter in Henry Tillman, and then when he beat Ricky Parquet, and before the Ricky Parquet fight, leading up to that fight, there was already talked about Evander moving up to heavyweight to challenge Mike Tyson. There were people already talking about that. People was begging to see that fight at that point because people knew what Evander could do. They seen his amateur career when he was very accomplished there. They saw what he was able to do in the Olympics. He captured the bronze, although the qualifying fight going into the for the gold medal qualifier ended the controversy, which people felt that Evander was robbed from that situation. But it is what it is, and people felt that he was proven. They felt that he was ready for Tyson at that point, and some people argued against it. Nah. Tyson was going to run over this guy. While at cruiserweight, people were already talking about Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. Okay. When he moved up to heavyweight after he beat Carlos De Leon, cleaned out the cruiserweight division, yes, he was taking on other tough, formidable opponents like Pinklin Thomas. Then you had Michael Dokes, obviously. Then you had, who else in there? You had a tough, once-time a dangerous prospect, undefeated Alex Stewart. Bloodied him up. That was a brutal fight. Ooh, Jesus Christ. Damn brutal fight right there. I mean, I'm watching that dude. Ugh. That was a paint job that Evander put on Alex Stewart. But you know what? Alex Stewart was a very tough fighter. You can't take anything away from him. He showed a lot of heart throughout, even though his career was underachieved, but he showed a lot of heart. He showed a lot of tenacity. And I liked Alex Stewart, and I really did. But, but the thing is that he was a known bleeder. God rest his soul, RIP. But when Evander moved up, Tyson at the time was being dismissive because, as I recall, to several, some reports I've seen and some interviews, Tyson was dismissive of Holyfield. And at the time, people were accusing Tyson of ducking Holyfield because that was a fight everyone wants to see. In fact, the Duvas were pointing out to this at the time when they were promoting and managing Evander Holyfield. They wanted that fight. They were pressing on Tyson to make that fight happen, right? And of course, the urban legend says that the reason why Tyson was dismissive of Evander Holyfield is because it all goes back to their amateur days. When him and Evander were fighting for the qualifier for the Olympics, they were, in the ring. They were not competing against each other in the ring as amateurs. But the urban legend goes is that when Evander and Mike Tyson sparred, and Mike Tyson was a heavyweight, let's not get it twisted, okay? He was a heavyweight and Evander was a light heavyweight, okay? When they were sparring, in the first round of that sparring, Evander hit Tyson with some ferocious hooks. And then from that point, Mike Tyson knew And he was shook for the first time. According to the urban legend, he was shook and he was shocked that a guy that was so little, not little, but who didn't weigh as much as he did, was able to bully him and, you know, rough him up in, you know, in the first round the way he did in that sparring session. Okay, of course, the pool table legend theory, the pool table situation, where this infamous situation with Mike Tyson, when Mike Tyson was bullying a lot of guys at the pool table when they were all at a house, they were hanging out, whatnot, with all the boxing coaches, whatnot. And Evander Holyfield, you know, Mike Tyson was punking all the other champions at the pool table, and Evander Holyfield walked up to Tyson, and he said, "Look, you know," he pretty much didn't say nothing to Tyson. He gave him this intimidating look. This, they call this the snarly look. It was so intimidating that, you know, people didn't know whether Evander Holyfield was serious or whether, you know, he was not serious. As I think it was Meldrick Taylor or Pernell Whitaker once said about Evander Holyfield, he's like, man, I think it was Pernell Whitaker who said this. He's like, man, I'll tell you one thing. When I walked up to Evander Holyfield, I don't know whether I wanted to shake his hand or whether I wanted to fight the guy, because it seemed like he was always serious every time he looked at you. And of course, Evander Holyfield was a scary dude at that time, what people, the urban legend says. And when Evander walked up to Tyson, when he gave him that intimidating look, and Tyson didn't want to back down, he gave him an intimidating look as well as too. And when Evander did, he grabbed his cubicle stick, and then he looked at Tyson. He said, "Okay, I dare you to punk me off this pool table." And the look lasted about a good minute or two. Then Tyson just lost his cool. He mentally broke down. He's like, "Fuck this, I'm out here," and threw the pool table stick, the cubicle stick. He threw it down and walked out of the pool table room. And from that point, whenever Evander Holyfield was brought up, Mike Tyson would just be dismissive. He would have a psychological issue when Evander Holyfield was brought up. Okay, because at that time, he didn't want people to know that was the only guy that can break him mentally. But anyways, back to the situation. People were demanding Evander Holyfield, Mike Tyson to fight after Evander moved up to heavyweight, when he took on James Quick Tillis. You know, the first guy to take Mike Tyson 12 rounds to a decision. Even though Tillis didn't win that fight, great. You know, Pinklon Thomas and Michael Dotes and Addison Rodriguez and Alex Stewart and Sheamus McDonald. Okay, now, as I mentioned again, people were calling for that fight to be made. Fans were calling for that fight. Even some fans were accusing Tyson for being a ducker. And I remember there was a conversation again with my dad and others when they were having this conversation about Tyson and Holyfield. Man, it got more heated to the point that it almost came to blows. That's how serious it was, especially with Tyson fans. Tyson had some fanatics back then, man. Rabid fanboys. I mean, really had rabid fanboys. The conversations got so heated to the point that people were beating each other up. I mean, it got really serious, man. And it almost came to that point when my dad was having discussions with people in the living room. And in the living room they were having, they would always talk about boxing, him and his friends, man. And they would always get these heated discussions about, Tyson ducking Holyfield. And like I said, Tyson fans didn't like that kindly. They didn't dismiss that notion. But needless to say, though, people wanted Tyson to fight Holyfield. That was a fight people wanted to see. Okay, even before Tyson beat what's his name? Even before Tyson beat Tony Tucker, and then after he beat Michael Spinks, people were calling for that fight for at least a year. They were calling for that fight to be made. But eventually, Tyson and Holyfield got together. They struck a deal between both parties. They said, look, this is what's going to happen. After Holyfield beat Pinklon Thomas, Tyson's camp and Holyfield's camp said, Tyson's camp and Holyfield's camp says, look, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have 3 interim fights. Holyfield has to get past Michael Dokes. He had to get past the other likes of Addison Rodriguez and Alex Stewart, you name it. So they had to agree to a deal where it was 3 fights between the two. All right. So one of those 3 will get through those fights. Then they will meet the following year. Okay. So they struck this deal back in 1989. And then 1990, this one, these guys were going to meet. But Tyson had to get past his other 3 interim fights. And of course, he had to get past Buster Douglas. Of course, that didn't happen. So when Tyson lost to Douglas, of course, plans changed from there. And then Evander Holyfield ended up fighting Buster Douglas instead of taking a rematch with Mike Tyson. And Evander ended up knocking out Douglas in 3 rounds to capture the undisputed title. Okay? So the standards were already set for both Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson. They were already set. When Evander captured that title against the White Muhammad Ali, he was put in there against dangerous opposition. Writers were calling for him to take certain fights against certain opponents, and certain fans were arguing at the time when social media didn't exist. So they were already set for Evander Holyfield. Okay. Now, since I'm on Mike Tyson topic, let me get to him before I get to Oscar De La Hoya. We all know that Mike Tyson had a storied career, especially in the 80s when he dominated that division, when he became the first #1 pound for pound fighter at the time when the 80s had ended, when that decade ended. Okay. Now, we don't, have to go much into Tyson's first run, as a pro. Okay, he turned pro in 1985, I believe. Yeah, was it 1985? Yeah, he turned pro in 1985, right? And of course, between 1985 and 1986, Mike Tyson averaged. Let me tell you this: he averaged 14 fights in his first 2 years as a pro. 14 years as a pro. This guy averaged 14 fights. That's unbelievable. And during that time, when I read some stories, when I've heard, when the conversations I'm having, now I'm not having, I'm sorry, when I'm overhearing these conversations with my father and, eventually my mother's boyfriend at the time, before my father left the family, personal situation I can't get into. But, my mom's boyfriend, for some reason, my mom, whenever she ended up with, they were all big boxing fans. But anyways, when my mom was with her boyfriend at the time, his friends were avid boxing fans, right? And the thing is too. Well, before I get into that, let me go back to this. My father, right? When Tyson was averaging 14 fights as a pro, his first 2 years, my father and his friends were always talking about, when's Mike Tyson going to step up? When's he going to step up? When's he going to step up? When's he going to step up? And, some will argue, the big Tyson fans, like, he's not ready to step up yet. He's not ready to step up yet. They're like, well, he's knocking a lot of people out. Why do you think he's not ready to step up? So it was a big of a debate whether he was ready or not. And then, a majority says that, well, Tyson should step up now. That now he was approaching, 16, 15 fights, 17 fights, whatnot. So they thought he should, he's got a little bit of experience now, so he should be, he should take a step up. Unless he test himself. Of course, people were calling for him as well as my father's friends. People were calling for Tyson to step up against a formidable opponent. All right, and that opponent that he stepped up against, Jesse Ferguson. Now at that time, broadcasters and leading up to that Jesse Ferguson fight, some writers, they would say that Jesse Ferguson will be the first guy to test Mike Tyson, because this is a guy who was in there against Carl the Truth Williams. This is a guy who has a win over Buster James Douglas, a guy who eventually became the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world for a short period of time. So they thought Jesse Ferguson was going to give Tyson a lot of trouble in their fight. And to Jesse Ferguson's credit, he did hang in there in the first few rounds against Tyson. But of course, Tyson was beating him up to the body. He was wearing him down. When people don't realize, Tyson was a very good body puncher, man. His body punching was very underrated. And he was very ferocious with that. He would break you down to the body and then eventually finish you off, with headshots. But I recall in that fight, man, it was a pretty messy fight. The reason why it was messy, because we all know that Jesse Ferguson was holding successively, and then he was ended up being disqualified due to excessive holding. Okay, and what's interesting about the situation is that Jesse Ferguson had his nose broken in this fight. I mean, badly broken. Because Mike Tyson set him up with a upstairs and with a right hook and then uppercut combination in the inside. And Mike Tyson used to throw those uppercuts with ferocity. Jesus Christ! And what's so funny about this, after the fight, the ringside officials have overturned. I think it was a New York State Athletic Commission official. He overturned the DQ. The DQ win for Tyson. He turned it from he ruled it from a DQ to a TKO, and obviously the reason why they did it because it's for political reasons. Because Tyson was at the time an up and coming fighter. He was pretty much a hot commodity. He was rising through the rankings, and they wanted to keep that streak going for political purposes, because they wanted to continue to promote Tyson as a knockout machine. All right, not until he fought a very tough heavyweight in James Quick Tillis, who actually took him to 10 rounds. All right. But anyhow, Tyson was able to, get into elimination bouts against Mitch Green, who at the time was a tough fighter. But Mitch Green, we all know about that guy. Mitch Green was a fucking crazy crackhead. Let's be realistic. Him and Tyson got into an altercation, outside of the ring when Tyson gave Green a fucking black eye. And we don't want to get into Mike Tyson's personal life. Robin Givens, he was married to him. Her. And, obviously, if you talk to Robin now, you don't want to ever mention the name Mike Tyson. Because I actually know people in the business in the entertainment industry who actually is very good friends with Robin Givens. So let me not go there on that. But anyways, Tyson, within a year, let's say a year and how many years? A year and several months, he gets his title shot after he beat Alfonso Ratliff, knocked him out in 2 rounds. He gets a shot against Trevor Berbick, okay? A guy who's been in there with Larry Holmes, who finished up a way faded Muhammad Ali, in his career, whatnot and so forth. Been in there with Greg Page and Ronaldo Snipes, you name it, some very good heavyweights. And of course, Pinkley Thomas. So, Travis Berbick, actually, and that's his first title defense. And after he's coming off a win against Pinkley Thomas, right? So Tyson gets in there against Travis Berbick, he knocks him out. Then he's in an immediate unification bout against James Crusher Smith. Then this is where the heavyweight tournament came into play. He fights Pinkley Thomas, takes him. He was the mandatory challenger. A mandatory got in the way in the tournament. That's cool. And then then he was in a unification bout with Tony Tucker, who was coming off an IBF title win against Buster Douglas. Okay. And yes, during at that time when Tyson was racking up those wins in unification bouts, a lot of pressure was put on him, okay? His personal, and so before I get into that. So, if you break it down, Mike Tyson record as a pro in his 3 years and 3 months, okay? After he beat Tony Tucker, he went on to fight Larry Holmes. He fought, beat him, knocked him out, even though Larry Holmes was faded at the time. He was coming out of a 3-year retirement. He, fought Tony Tubbs, a former champion, and then Michael Spinks, eventually a lineal light heavyweight champion at the time, undisputed light heavyweight champion at the time, who was also the lineal heavyweight champion at the time, right? 2-time lineal heavyweight champion. So if you break down the numbers, 3 years and 3 months as a pro, Mike Tyson was 35-0 with 31 KOs. He was an undisputed lineal heavyweight champion of the world. He beat 7 world champions, 2 lineal champions, and 2 Hall of Famers. Okay? So now you can understand why, in my first half of my presentation, why some people would hold champions like Gervonta Davis, champions like Deontay Wilder, and champions like Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Joseph Parker to the standards that Tyson was held and Evander Holyfield was held, in their short careers as a pro. Even though their careers, they did all these things in a short time span, within 3 years as a pro. But the fact of the matter is that once you pick up the belt, once you become a heavyweight champion, where did you become champion of the world, of any weight class that you compete in, your standards are going to be set at a high number. It's going to be set at the highest rate that you can, at the highest rate. That's happened. Okay? So you can see me as a fan who's watched this sport for such a long period of time, going all the way back to the 80s, watching fights before that, not studying, watching fights or studying fights before that. You can see where I'm coming from. Now, again, this video is more about me as a fan and why I have standards for guys who become champions. Okay? Because if Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson could accomplish all these things, again, I have to repeat myself, in a short time span, then why can't other champions do the same thing right now, like Julius Ndongo is doing? Yes. And, this is a mixture of everything. You got, fighters who doing, this is a mixture of everything. You got fighters who can pick up a belt at the time in the 80s, even up to the 90s. They get in there against formidable opponents, whether it's unification or not, or whether they're fighting tough mandatories. They're all taking on tough challenges when they become champions. And this is why I expect that standard for guys of today. Once you pick up that belt, I expect you to defend against all the top contenders, all the dangerous contenders, in all unification bouts. If you're not doing that, then I got to hold you accountable. Now, the question is, some fighters do take touch-ups, soft touch-ups while they're, championship runs. That's fine. That's cool. I got no problem with that. But the thing is that I need you to be consistent as a champion. While in the stretch as a champion, you can take up some, fight a little bit obscure opposition. You need to, but at the same time, you got to step it up. You got to start unifying with the champions. You got to continue to fight tough opposition. You got to do it. Once you hold that belt, you got to be held to that standard. That's my principle, and that's my belief. Okay? Now let's move on to Oscar De La Hoya. Okay? Now, Oscar De La Hoya is a unique situation. Let me tell you why. Okay, because after he won that gold medal in the Olympics, in the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, a Mexican American kid coming from East LA, all right, where I used to live nearby. I didn't live in East LA actually, I used to live in East LA, close to it at one point. But, I didn't live too far from either as a youth. His standard was already set. Oscar De La Hoya was featured on commercials. I recall there was a parade. I remember they closed off certain streets in LA to honor Oscar De La Hoya when he was in East LA. A gold medalist, whatnot. He was getting all sorts of endorsement deals. He was getting all these multi-contract deals where certain, organizations, whatnot. This guy already was put in a situation with a lot of pressure, and the standards were already set for him. Okay? So if you look at Oscar De La Hoya's career, he turned pro in 1992, okay? So in his first fight, he fought Lamar Williams. Second fight, he fought Clifford Hicks. Third fight, he fought Paris Alexander. Fourth fight, he fought Curtis Strong. And then he fought Jeff Mayweather. Interesting, he fought Jeff Mayweather. Okay, in his fifth pro fight, a Mayweather that he actually beat. And then in his sixth pro fight, he fought Mike Garble. Then in his seventh pro fight, he fought Frank Avalar. And in his eighth pro fight, he fought a world champion in Troy Dorsey. Now, Troy Dorsey was not a great fighter, I know that. But the fact is, he was a world champion, so yes. Okay? Then in his ninth pro fight, Oscar fought Ronaldo Carter. In the 10th pro fight, he fought Angelo Nunes. Then in the 11th pro fight, an eliminator. And in WO title eliminator, he fought Narciso Venezuela. Okay? And then he got a shot against the undefeated champion in Jimmy Bordal. Okay, so I believe that fight on the undercard of James Toney's fight. I believe that was on the undercard of a James Toney fight. I believe, or it was the Jorge Paez fight. I think it was one of the two. I believe that was the fight. I don't know. I have to go back and check. But anyways, when Oscar De La Hoya captured that title against Jimmy Bordal, even though the WBO title was less regarded back then, the standards was set on Oscar De La Hoya already. Some people counted that WBO as a legit title. Some people didn't. But a consensus would agree that it was not a recognized title. But the standard was already set for him already back then, because even though he picked up a minor belt, that was the case. Okay? There are already talks about De La Hoya moving up and fight better competition. Okay? So, super featherweight, some people argue that he was being a weight bully because some people felt that he was too big for that weight class. He was fighting over a guy smaller than him, and this was the ridicule that he was getting, okay? Then he fought Giorgio Campillo in his first title defense. He won that fight. Then he moves up to lightweight and fight Jorge Paez, a former champion who was a tough fighter, who was a crowd pleaser. He had a tough, crowd pleasing style, a guy who was, used to absorb a lot of punches in fights. Jesus Christ, okay? So people argued at that time that Jorge Paez, and some fans, even though when I was, going to middle school, we used to always talk about boxing, and, in the classroom, whatnot. My friends at the time who didn't like Oscar De La Hoya, and some of them who did like him were arguing. Some who didn't like him say, you know what, Jorge Paez is going to knock this guy out. They were going to knock this guy out. And some of the De La Hoya fans was like, some people were worried about this. They thought De La Hoya wasn't really ready for that fight. I don't know why, but hey, they felt that, and some writers felt that Jorge Paez was going to be the toughest opponent for Oscar De La Hoya to this day. Okay? De La Hoya got Jorge Paez out of here in the second round. And already, some writers criticized De La Hoya for that win. They said, okay, it's time for you to step up now. That was not a good win. And De La Hoya was pissed about that. He was like, okay, wait a minute. You guys said that, De La Hoya was quoted in one article. I think it was the LA Times. He was quoted by saying that, well, you know what? You guys said that some people, some critics, even some fans said that Jorge Paez was going to be my toughest opponent. He was going to beat me. And now you guys don't want to give me credit for the win. Okay. I see how that goes. Okay, so when he picked up the WBO lightweight title, people were calling for him to fight Rafael Ruiz, the other champion. People were calling for that fight. People thought De La Hoya was ducking Ruiz. Some people, my friends at the time were arguing with these heated discussions. Like I said, these things ended up in heated discussions. I can recall when the De La Hoya fanatics back then, when Oscar De La Hoya was rising up in the rankings. Oh boy, if you say anything bad about Oscar De La Hoya, they will challenge you to a fight. I recall as a kid, leading up to the Ruiz fight, when some of the De La Hoya critics, some of my friends, were saying that he was scared of Ruiz, he was ducking him. I recall one of the guys and another guy, and they were both my friends, They got into a fist fight in the classroom, and the teacher had to break it up, man. I tried to break it up, and man, it got so volatile to the point that these guys were knocking each other through, classroom desks. I mean, guys were, kids were yelling, "Fight, fight, fight!" Man, I was in middle school when this happened, and it was so serious, man. I'm like, wow, if you want to talk about fanboyism, I mean, that was severely fanboyism for what I seen right there. But anyways, critics were, some critics and some of my friends, not my friends, but other critics like writers were saying that Oscar De La Hoya needs to step it up. And mind you, this is a guy who was in his 12th pro fight after the Jorge Paez fight, already calling for him to step up. You got to step up. You got to do better than this. You got to do better than Jorge Paez. Even though some people said that Jorge Paez was going to be his toughest challenge, and some people felt that he wasn't ready for that fight. When he got through, after he, took on Carl Griffith, John Avila, then he fought John Molina, who was a multi-time champion, who some people felt that he, was going to be a tough challenge for him, and he got rid of John Molina. Then the Rafael Ruiz fight came about. This is a fight that Oscar De La Hoya was an underdog. This was a unification bout, a pay-per-view fight, by the way. A fight that Oscar De La Hoya dominated Ruiz in 2 rounds and got him out of there. Beat him after that. And then what was his next fight? Against Genaro Hernandez. Genaro Hernandez, who moved up in weight to challenge Oscar De La Hoya. Right. The same Genaro Hernandez, who was a lineal champion, who had string of title defenses, who beat Zuma Nelson and become a lineal champion. That's the same Genaro Hernandez that Oscar De La Hoya fight. And it was another fight that people felt that Oscar De La Hoya was not going to win. Okay? Yes, I think he was a slight favorite to win that fight, but there were some critics who said that he wasn't ready for that fight either. And some critics, some of my friends, again, arguing, who did not like De La Hoya, said that De La Hoya was going to get knocked out by Hernandez. Okay? So after that, what did Oscar De La Hoya do? In fact, that was a bit of an ugly promotion too, because Hernandez was chastising De La Hoya, calling him, a fake Mexican, just like Fernando Vargas was doing, calling him, "You're not a real Mexican." So it was a very not asking promotion. So after that, De La Hoya was in a tough fight against a tough opponent in John Molina, beat him in a decision. Then Rafael Ruiz knocked him out. Then he was in another tough fight against Genaro Hernandez. And guess what? After the Genaro Hernandez fight, people were already calling for De La Hoya to fight Julio Cesar Chavez, a guy who was one weight class above him. People were calling for that fight to be made after the Genaro Hernandez fight. Fight Genaro Hernandez. Fight Julio Cesar Chavez. They were challenging De La Hoya to do it. Some people were calling him a coward. Move up to fight Chavez. Move up. But De La Hoya didn't move up yet. No. I wanted him to fight Julio Cesar Chavez. I wanted to see that fight. But some people didn't want to see it. Okay? And majority did. So they were harassing De La Hoya to make that fight. And be fair, they were harassing Julio Cesar Chavez to make that fight as well. So before he could take the fight with Julio Cesar Chavez, he fights Jesse James Leija, who was a tough fighter at the time. De La Hoya got him out in 2 rounds. Daryl Tyson. Then he moves up to fight. After the Jesse James Leija fight, he takes one fight. His first fight at 140 against Daryl Tyson, and then he got a shot against Julio Cesar Chavez, a fight that he was an underdog. At the time, was the highest grossing fight on pay-per-view, highest grossing fight at the time, because it was the fight that everyone wanted to see while Oscar De La Hoya was fighting at lightweight. Everybody was calling for that fight to be made, man. People were demanding it. Yes, it couldn't happen right away, but people were harassing Oscar De La Hoya to do it. Okay? So, the fight got made, and De La Hoya took out Julio Cesar Chavez in the 4th round, TKO. No one saw that one coming. I didn't see that coming as a teen. And people were ecstatic when Oscar De La Hoya, especially Oscar De La Hoya fans at the time. And I ain't gonna lie to you, Oscar De La Hoya made me a fan after that fight. He did. After he was, fought a guy in an underdog situation, a guy that no one thought he could beat. And many people felt that he was not ready for that fight, even though he was pressured to take it. Okay? Again, it goes back to my point. All right? Before I get to my point again, let me wrap this up. Not just quite yet, though, because I still got a long way to go. So 3 years as a pro, Oscar De La Hoya was 3 years, 6 months. He was 22-0 with 20 knockouts. He was a unified world champion. Okay? He defeated 2 lineal champions. He defeated 8 world champions and one Hall of Famer. He did all that in 3 years and 6 months as a pro. Okay? So, Okay, let's move on to Fernando Vargas. Okay, Fernando Vargas is a very unique situation as well. Okay, even though he did become a unified champion, but the expectations were set for him as well. Okay, let's look at Fernando Vargas. He turned pro in March of 1927. All right, I mean 1927. Wow. Oh, I'm talking about the Great Depression era, the years of Herbert Hoover. Nah, glad I wasn't born around that time. But anyways. His first pro fight, he fought Jorge Morales. Then in his second fight, he fought Claude Staton, Bill Burton, Jimmy Maloney, Eugene Lopez, Kevin Payne in his up to sixth pro fight. And then Alex Goria in the seventh pro fight. Goroga, I believe, in the eighth pro fight. Jose Miguel Fernandez in his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then ninth, Eduardo Martinez. In his 10th pro fight, Dan Connolly. And then his 11th pro fight, Romales Ellis. And in his 12th pro fight against Ron Johnson. And then in his 13th pro fight against Anthony Stevens. In his 14th pro fight, he fought, I think it's 15. Yes, 15th pro fight, he fought Darren McCoskey. And then he got a shot against your boy Campos, all right? Now, this is an interesting situation. As I recall, and in the reports I've read, and the things I've read about this, many people were arguing that Fernando Vargas was not ready for that fight, okay? In his 15th pro fight, and this is your boy Campos, a tough guy who's been in there, who beat the likes of Maurice Blocker, who's been in there against Felix Trinidad, who's also been in there with guys like Hector Mata Camacho, whatnot. Well, I mean, that was later stages of the career, whatnot, okay? But anyways, before that, he fought Verdell Smith. He fought Raul Marquez, the same guy Fernando Vargas beat, a very tough fighter, Raul Marquez, okay? Jose Luis Lopez, a very tough fighter. Jorge Vaca. This is a guy that people thought that Fernando Vargas did not stand a chance against, okay? A guy that people thought Fernando Vargas was not ready to take on it. A young guy who's already been a pro. So, it's funny about that. 1 year, he gets a title shot already, all right? 1 year, Fernando Vargas. And he's going to put in against your boy Campos, okay? So what happens after that, right? So after in that particular fight, he made Jorge Campos quit. It was a very competitive fight, but Fernando Vargas was getting the upper hand because in that fight, he proved to be a better boxer. He was far more technical than your boy Campos. And at that point, Fernando Vargas made history. 1 year as a pro, 1 year, 6 months, he becomes a world champion at light middleweight. The youngest world champion in history at the time at the age of 21. He did that. Wow. But guess what? It didn't stop from there. Fernando Vargas, he later fought Howard Clark in the mandatory defense. Then he fights, I think that was a voluntary defense. I have to go back and look at that. Then he fights Roy Marquez, as I mentioned, a very tough fighter, former champion. Then he gets in his next fight after Roy Marquez. In his 18th pro fight, he gets in there against Ronald Winky Wright. All right? We all know about Winky Wright's career, okay? And this particular fight, this was not much. It was a bit of a controversial fight. This is a fight that Winky Wright was taking the fight to Fernando Vargas, something that nobody expected, okay? Now, Fernando Vargas wasn't there, was fighting, obviously he was fighting straight up against Winky. They were fighting most of this fight in the inside. And at one point in that fight, Winky knocked Fernando's mouth guard off. And Winky was really giving it to Fernando. But to be honest, I think, it was a very close fight, man. It was tough to score. Some people felt that Winky should have been awarded that decision. But then again, I mean, you could argue that Fernando won that fight as well because Winky kind of took himself. He kind of gave away some rounds to Fernando. All right. So Fernando, in a very, very tough title defense, he goes in there and he beats Winky Wright. All right. And then he's in another tough fight against Ike Corte. We all know about Ike Corte, the same guy that people claim that Felix Trinidad ducked, and I have to believe that. And I'm going to get into that right in a second. All right. A tough Ike Corte, who was a long-reigning WBA champion. All right. And Ike Corte, who pretty much coming up in weight. Ike Corte gave Fernando a very tough fight. Even though Fernando Vargas won that fight, there was no disputing that he won. But Ike Corte gave Fernando Vargas pretty much all that he could handle, okay? And people expected Fernando Vargas to kind of walk through Corte to some degree because he was a smaller guy coming up in weight. But the fact is that I don't know what some of the odd some people will just believe that because Ike Corte was a guy who never been knocked out in his career. Yes, he was down at one point in an Oscar De La Hoya fight, but he was a very tough guy who had a very solid chin, who had a pretty good work rate, all right? And he got through that fight, and then he fights a very tough opponent who was his mandatory challenger, Ross the Box Thompson. And the boss right there, Thompson, I know leading up to that fight, he had him and Fernando. I mean, that was a very ugly promotion if you think about it. Because leading up to that fight, as I recall, and I can't believe why this tape is not on, on YouTube. I can't even find the tape. But I know when I watched the press conference, Fernando, they were getting into a heated argument, him and Ross Thompson. Ross Thompson called him a bum, and then he walked over to the table and he decked Fernando Vargas. I'm like, whoa. he decked him, and then he caused Fernando Vargas' mouth to bleed, and Fernando was hot. He was angry. I mean, the anger was so scary, man. It was like, whoa, Jesus. I felt that Fernando was really wanting to kill this dude after that. Because Fernando, he comes from Oxnard, man. That's a tough area. I'll tell you that right now. But anyways, after he beat Thompson, he gets into unification bout with Felix Trinidad. But before I get into Felix Trinidad bout, let me say this about Fernando Vargas. Okay? If you look at Fernando Vargas, in 1 year and 6 months, he becomes a world champion. A youngest champion in history before it was broken by, Canelo Alvarez. All right? He beat 4 world champions, 1 lineal champion, and 1 undisputed champion. All right? He did all that in 3 years and 6 months before the Felix Trinidad fight. Okay? And up to that point, he was fighting 2 times a year. Obviously, that's like sometimes it's somewhat the norm for certain fighters. But he was being busy. Okay? But the fact is that his expectations was set to that standard that once you become a champion, we're going to put you in there against tough opposition. And some argue that, after the Trinidad fight, a fight that everybody was calling for, by the way, in fact, some of the Fernando Vargas fans were calling Oscar De La Hoya a ducker and a coward before leading up to Felix Trinidad fight back in 1999, because Fernando Vargas was blatantly calling out Oscar De La Hoya, and Oscar De La Hoya was being dismissive about him, said some derogatory things about Vargas, and of course the Fernando Vargas fans did not like it at all. So as you can see, fans' expectation, they expected Fernando Vargas to be in tough fights. They got it. But the fans really wanted to see him fight Oscar De La Hoya. That's what the Fernando Vargas fans wanted. And they wanted him to fight Felix Trinidad as well. And some of the Trinidad fans wanted that fight too. Okay, after Trinidad squeaks by Oscar De La Hoya, he moves up to weight. And now I'm getting on to Felix Trinidad now. Okay, when he beat Maurice Blocker to capture the title, yeah, the expectations were set for Felix Trinidad as well. Yes, he wasn't in a unification bout. The fight that everyone was calling for after he beat Maurice Blocker, okay? And he did that in his 20th pro fight, and he became a champion in 3 years as a pro, okay? 3 years as pro, well, actually 3 years and in several months as a pro. He was in there with Maurice Blocker, and then he beat Hector Macho Camacho. And then after that, he, you can say a little bit, 4 years now. So it's 3 years he beat Hector Camacho and Maurice Blocker, okay? But when Felix Trinidad was the IBF champion, the pressure was already set on him already, okay? People were calling for him to fight Ike Cortez. As I recall, when, me and my friends were having a discussion, and then, several writers. In fact, American Online, when I first got AOL back in 1993, in 1994, there was chat rooms, recreation sports section. When you go into the chat rooms, people, as I recall in the conversations, people were calling Trinidad a fucking coward for avoiding Ike Cortez. And some of the Trinidad fans is like, okay, who the fuck is Ike Cortez? Who did he beat? Why does he deserve to get a shot at Felix Trinidad? This was a debate that was argued for the last few years. And yes, this was an underrated debate because no one knew. Because Felix Trinidad at the time was not, he wasn't becoming a rising star. It was not until like around 1996, I believe, or around 1997, he was starting to become a household attraction. He'd be starting to become a crossover name, okay? So the Trinidad fans was arguing the fact that Ike Cortez didn't deserve a shot against Felix Trinidad. And of course, the Felix Trinidad detractors were arguing against the fact that Ike Cortez deserves a shot. He was being ducked. You need to unify with Felix. Trinidad needs to unify with that guy. Okay, of course, that fight never happened because that was a fight people wanted to see. Later in the years, when Trinidad retired and he announced, during his Hall of Fame speech, the question was presented to him, and I saw this saw this interview. He was asked about that. He said, "Why didn't that fight happen between you and Ike Cortez? A fight that people wanted to see. Even writers was calling for that fight to happen." Okay, and Trinidad was pressured to take it. And of course, Papa Trinidad, his father, Trinidad Senior, asked him, took the question, and Trinidad Senior said, "Look, we were tied up in a lot of litigation issues, some litigation issues that prevented us to make that fight, whatnot, blah blah blah. But after we've gone through that litigation process, we moved on." I'm like, okay, you moved on, but once you got through the litigation process, but you didn't make an attempt to make the fight. I don't know what he meant by moving on, because I'm not sure if Trinidad Senior was very sure that his son could win that fight against Ike Corte. That's just my indication why they were putting that fight off as long as they could. Okay, so I don't know, man. I don't know. But if you want to call it a duck by Felix Trinidad, that could be argued, given the fact that Trinidad Senior had said that, you know what, we were moved on, we didn't want to focus on that fight. Okay, I see where this is going. So anyways, by fan pressure, they held Trinidad to that standard. They told him that you need to start fighting Ike Corte. They wanted that fight. You need to start fighting better opposition. They didn't like when he fought Oprah Carr. They didn't like the fact he fought Freddie Pendleton, Troy Walters. Yeah, and then it finally stepped, Trinidad in his reign as IBF champion, he finally got a formidable challenge. Other than Hector Camacho, who he beat, a very tough fighter, 2-division champion who was a Hall of Famer. Other than that, some people felt that he was fighting obscurity. He fought Pernell Whitaker. I think a fight that Whitaker was favored to win, and then Trinidad convincingly beat Whitaker the first time that anybody was able to handle Whitaker the way Trinidad did. Okay? He proved himself. After the Whitaker fight, there were stronger calls to make the fight between him and Oscar De La Hoya. And mind you, people were calling for Oscar De La Hoya to fight 2 years prior. 2 years prior, they were talking about Trinidad De La Hoya. Trinidad De La Hoya, make that fight. It was a bit. This was actually, as I recall, this was a. If you want to talk about the Pacquiao and Mayweather rivalry, this rivalry was really, really, really heated, and it got really nasty. Okay, back then when I was in the chat rooms, man, people were going at it about this rivalry back in like in 1997 about Trinidad De La Hoya. Both sides was accusing each other of ducking. They saying that Trinidad is ducking. They were saying, who does Trinidad fought to get a shot at De La Hoya? De La Hoya fought much better opposition than Trinidad. He got to earn his right to get a shot at De La Hoya, right? That's what the De La Hoya fans were saying back at that time, right? And so, Trinidad fans were arguing against that. And then when Trinidad beat Pernell Whitaker, they said, okay, yeah, he beat a formidable guy. And then De La Hoya fans is like, no. Our guy already beat Whitaker. So that doesn't count. This is what they were saying back then. Really, that's what they were saying. This is what the fans were saying back then in the chat rooms, man. And some of the conversations I was having with guys in the boxing gym. They were arguing against this, man. And I'm telling you, this was such a heated rivalry. It was Puerto Rico versus Mexico. It was such heated over the 2 years, man. 2 years. And then when they finally made that fight, we all know the end result to that. Some argue that Oscar De La Hoya was robbed from a decision. And yeah, some people will say the reason why De La Hoya lost that fight because he ran from Trinidad in the later half of that fight. Okay. So my point is that once you pick up that championship belt, Trinidad was held to that same standard, even though he didn't take on the fight that people wanted him to take on during his reign as his 3 year, the fights that they want him to take on his 3 year reign as IBF champion. Okay, they accused him for ducking Ike Corte. But the fact is, even though he didn't make that fight happen, he later down the road made the fight against Oscar De La Hoya. The standard was already set on him, just like I had the standard set on too as a teen at the time when I was watching him fight. Okay? Now, I'm not off on Trinidad yet. Before I get to Ricardo Mayorga, that's a unique case. Let me get into that. Let me finish up on Trinidad. When Trinidad moved up in weight and fought Fernando Vargas. First he moved up to take on David Reed, okay? And this is a unique situation with David Reed, okay? The sad situation, David Reed was another guy with a lot of expectations was put on him as well. When he won the the WBA title in his 12th pro fight against a long range champion Laurent Badani. There was a lot of standards set on David Reed because he was Olympic gold medalist. He had big backers behind him, and there was a lot of pressure on him. Okay, he won the title. Some people felt he was not ready for that fight against Duran Budani, who was a long-reigning light middleweight champion. Okay, he outpointed him. He schooled Laurent Budani. Okay, he schooled him. All right. Then later he took on Kevin Kelly, his first title defense, and this is David Reed. Then Keith Mullings, who was a former champion. I mean, a tough fighter, but wasn't a great fighter. Then they put him in there in his 15th pro fight against Felix Trinidad. And many people argue that he was not ready for that fight. But the fact is that, look, here's the thing I say, and I say this again. Once you're champion, there is no such thing as that you're not ready for a fight. Because if you're not ready for a fight, then why are you fighting for a championship title then? If you're not ready for a title, then vacate your title. Move on, okay? Let somebody else who's willing to challenge themselves to fight for a title. Let them prove themselves to be great. That's what I argue, okay? So it's sad what happened to David Reed, okay? It's sad what happened to him, you know. But hey, it is what it is. This is boxing. This is the way it works. And let's be fair to David Reed. Again, as I probably said already, because I'm having trouble with this program. That David Reed already proved himself against... he fought a long-reigning champion at Toronto, and he had a couple of title defenses here and there. He was an Olympic gold medalist, so his standard was already set there. And people expected him to be in big fights, and of course he didn't prevail against Felix Trinidad, and that's what happens. All right. So now, as I was saying, that people were arguing that David Reed was not ready for the Trinidad fight, which is debatable. But my argument is that, well, he fought for world title against a long-reigning champion, Laurent Budani, who was a favorite to beat David Reed. Okay, he beat him, outpointed him, had a couple of title defenses against former champion and Kevin Molly and Keith Mullings, whatnot. So if he's able to beat him, right? If he's able to beat him in a tough fighter in Kevin Kelly, then once you're a champion, the expectations are going to be set for you. People are going to assume you're ready after you beat a fight like Mr. Budani. Okay, that's the argument there, man. So the thing is, if you feel your fighter's not ready for any type of fight, don't just, if you feel a fighter's not ready for a certain fight, just don't pick up a title. Play, cause I know it sounds harsh, but it is what it is. Just don't feel, that's just my take on it. The thing is that, again, I have to repeat myself. Once you capture that championship belt, those standards will be set for you at a very high rate. Okay. So it's sad what happened to David Reed. His career was never the same after that Felix Trinidad fight. Okay, when Trinidad battered him all over the place. It was brutal. He battered him. Okay, and to be fair, David Reed had early success. He knocked out Trinidad in the I think it was the 5th round. He knocked him down with an overhand right. Then Trinidad got up and battered him to the body. Started throwing some ferocious left hook, which put down David Reed 5 times in that fight. Whoa. It was vicious. Okay, but anyways. After the David Reed fight, when Trinidad picked up the light middleweight title, after he moved up, beat De La Hoya, got an immediate shot. So he, makes a voluntary defense against Mamadou Vahami, got him out in the first 3 rounds. And then, like I said, the pressure was put on Trinidad when he moved up in weight. The Fernando Vargas fans, even though they were arguing for the De La Hoya fight at the same time, they were calling for the Fernando Vargas and Felix Trinidad fight. People were calling for it when Trinidad moved up. People were calling for it. They were asking for it to be made after the David Reed fight. Of course, people were not happy that Felix Trinidad elected to take an interim fight in between. But it is what it is. I think what it is that Vargas and the Trinidad camps got together. They agreed that, we'll get an interim fight in between. Once we get through our interim fights, then we're going to meet. So I think that's what had happened when they negotiated. Okay? So... yeah, so that's the whole situation, all right? So when they meet it, Fernando Vargas, we all know the end result of that fight. Fernando Vargas put up a great effort. He went down in the first round twice against Felix Trinidad. And then, he put down Trinidad in the 3rd round, I think, or the 4th round. I think it was the 3rd, 4th round. He put down Trinidad with the left hook, and Trinidad didn't see it coming. And that hurt Trinidad. He was hurt. And, some people felt that Trinidad was going to get his first loss because he was fighting a bigger, stronger guy who was technically good, who had the great fundamentals as a fighter. Okay? So, this gets interesting. When Felix Trinidad, after he beat Fernando Vargas, oh boy. And even after the De La Hoya fight, a lot more pressure was put on him. Okay? And let me tell you why. Because people were calling for Trinidad to give Oscar De La Hoya a rematch. I remember these conversations in the chat rooms at AOL way before social media became these social media programs like YouTube and Facebook, Twitter, you name it, and Instagram. Way before these things started to pop around, we had AOL chat rooms and certain blogs. Okay, back then, when Fernando Vargas, after he beat Fernando Vargas, Felix Trinidad was facing a lot of pressure. Okay, people were calling on him to take the rematch with De La Hoya. Some Fernando Vargas fans were calling for him to give Fernando Vargas a rematch. All right, and yet if Shane Mosley was coming into the fray, certain Mosley fans were arguing for Felix Trinidad to make that fight between him and Mosley. And let me tell you why. Because when Mosley was coming off a win, okay, when Mosley was coming off a win against De La Hoya that year in 2001, when Felix Trinidad was coming off a win against William Joppy, right, moving up to middleweight, okay. Before that, when Shane Mosley was getting into welterweight, okay, people were calling, the Mosley fans were saying that you need to fight our guy, Shane Mosley. You need to fight Shane Mosley. This is what they were saying. And then the Trinidad team was like, oh, no, forget you. No, you just want our name because you just calling us out because you want a big payday. That's all it is. So when Felix Trinidad's team said that, or some writers were making that assertions, oh, no, the Mosley fans did not like that at all. Oh, I'm not making this up. It's all written, man. They did not like that at all. So Trinidad was facing a lot of pressure. You take the De La Hoya rematch, even though De La Hoya initially argued that he wanted that rematch at 147, and Trinidad made that clear that he's not going back down to 147. And then Oscar De La Hoya conceded, said, okay, I'll come up to 154 to fight you. And yet, Trinidad didn't want to take the rematch. He moves up to 160 instead. So a lot of Oscar De La Hoya fans were disappointed. They were upset about that. They called Trinidad a coward and a ducker because Oscar De La Hoya offered to come up to 154 to take that fight, and Trinidad opted not to do it. And he got ridiculed for that badly, and I remember. He got ridiculed, okay? Because when the Trinidad team was arguing that the reason why we're moving up to 160 is because we want to make our names ourselves there, because people are arguing that 160 has no names. People are arguing, who the fuck is Bernard Hopkins? Who the fuck is William Joppy? Who the fuck is Keith Holmes? This is what the people were saying. But the whole plan was to get Trinidad to get the unified belts at 160, move up to fight Roy Jones Jr., because that was the fight that some people were calling for. The plan was to get that fight, to get Trinidad to move up, to take on Roy Jones, okay? Initially the plan was to get Roy Jones to come down from light heavyweight to down to 168 to make that fight, okay? And then there was some arguments to make it a catchweight for the light heavyweight title, okay? And Roy Jones was not a big light heavyweight, so he could have perhaps gone down to to 168 to make that fight. Who knows? But the fact is, that was the team Trinidad's plan to do. They wanted to get the Roy Jones fight because they knew that Roy Jones was a big money fight. He was the cash cow. I mean, in fact, they were the cash cows themselves. So at the same time, they felt it was more lucrative and more of a name to take that fight. But they wanted to go ahead and make a name for themselves at 160. And they thought Trinidad was going to go through 160, okay? But again, my point is that they were calling Trinidad a coward and a ducker when he did not take that fight at 154 with De La Hoya. And then some people felt that he ducked Shane Mosley, which is an interesting note. And I'm going to get to that point right now. Okay, and some people, the librarian had made up the point that, well, fighters who are fighting, unification bouts, immediate unification bouts, or back-to-back unification bouts, or taking on dangerous opposition after winning a title. Back then, there are some exceptions, like these fighters have gone through. His arguments are, well, that's different because promoters and TV networks ordered that, not the fans. Well, that may be the case to some degree, but you have to understand that fans, sports writers, columnists are just good as fans, and some fans who at the time didn't have a voice in social media will argue for those fights to be made as well. Okay? But it goes back to my point. Once you're a champion, your standards are set to make those fights happen because, one, people expect that out of you. They expect you to see how good you are, to see if you're truly the best. And two, from a business perspective, fights like that generate big profits and big revenues, okay? And three, it does test the fighter's greatness. All right, some fighters prevail in that situation where they turned out to be great fighters. Some don't, some do, but some do pick themselves up. They recover from that. They end up having great second or third runs as champions. It has happened. Okay? So, the fact is that we're also going to the point. The fact is that when Trinidad moved up, he beat William Joppy, then he got into unification bout with Bernard Hopkins. He lost that fight for the undisputed title. And what's unique about Trinidad is that he moved up. When he moved up in weight, he got immediate title shots. That's very unique, exception for with the exception of the Roy Jones fight when they made in 2008, which is just a money fight. It was nothing on the line, no titles on the line or nothing like that. But it is what it is. But the fact is that that's the unique thing about it. Now, on to this fact on why should fighters fight in back-to-back unifications after unifications, or fight in unification bouts immediately after they won a title. That's crazy. Well, here's the thing. If this guy in the picture right before you can do it, and Bernard Hopkins can do it, which I forgot to mention, then why can't the other champions do it? Or Julius Ndongo, what he's doing right now. So let me give you Ricardo Mayorga, for example. Yes, Ricardo Mayorga, interesting story. Ricardo Mayorga, when he beat Andrew Lewis, right, to capture his world title, RIP Andrew Lewis, 6 heads, he was an immediate unification bout against Vernon Forrest, okay? Now, Vernon Forrest was a heavy favorite to win that fight. Of course, and Vernon Forrest was another guy who was put a lot of pressure on him, a guy who was coming off his big win against Shane Mosley, a fight that people favored Mosley to win. He captured the lineal WBC title from him and then beat him in an immediate rematch. And they expected Vernon Forrest to win a unification bout. And then the fight that people were talking about is Vernon Forrest versus Corey Spinks. That's the fight that people wanted to see at that point. And then Ricardo Mayorga, when he got into an immediate unification bout against Vernon Forrest, knocked him out, bullied Vernon Forrest throughout the first 3 rounds of that fight, and knocked him out in a stunning upset and captured another title, and the lineal title at that. All right. And many people felt at the time that Mayorga's win against Vernon Forrest was a fluke, okay? Because if you look at it from a stylistic standpoint, Vernon Forrest was far better technical than Ricardo Mayorga, far more technical. Of course, Mayorga, the best thing Mayorga could do is to beat you is 1, take you out of your technical game, and 2, and take you to a psychological realm where he wants you, where he can get into your head and make you fight the fight that he wants you to fight. And that's what happened to Vernon Forrest. Of course, in the rematch, there was an immediate rematch. Ricardo Mayorga took the immediate rematch. He won a majority decision. Then after that, he was in a unification bout against Corey Spinks for the undisputed welterweight title. He did all that in a 1-year stretch. Ricardo Mayorga, going back to from 2002 up to 2003, in a 1-year stretch. And speaking of Corey Spinks, when he came off his win against Michel Picciarello for the IBF title, he didn't have any mandatory defenses. He didn't have any. Or any voluntaries. He got into an immediate unification undisputed championship fight against Ricardo Mayorga. People felt that he stood no chance against Mayorga, and he ended up prevailing and winning that fight. Okay, so again, it goes back to the point where people say that it's crazy for a fighter to go into an immediate unification bout where these fighters, Ricardo Mayorga, Bernard Hopkins, and Julius Ndongo, have done. Okay, now you can argue that Bernard Hopkins' situation is a little different because his situation is that, well, he was placed in a middleweight tournament, so that's different. Well, yeah, but the problem is, well, the thing is that you have to also take into account is that Hopkins did not have to partake in that tournament. Okay, he could have vacated his belt. He could have let Keith Holmes fight as the other champion at the WBC, fight for it in a vacant fashion against another fighter in the IBF. He could have done that, but Hopkins could have vacated the title and said, fuck the tournament. I'm gonna just go ahead and get out of the tournament and then take an easier route to get a shot at the title. He could have done that, but he chose not to do it. He chose to go into the fray against Keith Holmes in a unification bout and go into another unification bout against Felix Trinidad, a fight that no one thought he could win. Okay, so if Bernard Hopkins and Ricardo Mayorga can go into immediate unification bouts and take on tough fights after tough fights after tough fights, then why can't the champions of today can do the same thing? Why can't they do it? Julius Ndongo is doing it. Terrence Crawford is doing it. So why can't the other champions do it? Why can't they be held to the standards? What I find very funny about this, a shout out to JWC, by the way, Fight Fan. He said, quote, what's funny, he made his latest videos. It's like funny, when you apply a certain standard to one fighter, the other people that call you unbiased, that's cool. They have no problem when you have the certain standards for one particular fighter that they don't give a fuck about. But when you apply that same standard to their fighter that they closely identify themselves to, it's a big fucking problem. It's unbelievable. Talk about hypocrisy right there, okay? Now, so, again, and another thing I forgot to mention in this video is that I'm going to go back to the Mike Tyson situation leading up to the Michael Spinks fight. Now, when Michael Spinks won the title, again, the lineal IBF title against Larry Holmes, some people felt that he was awarded a decision. A lot of critics at the time was arguing against Michael Spinks. They were calling him a coward when he refused to defend his title against other tough opposition in the heavyweight division. Okay? And let me tell you why. When the heavyweight tournament was assembled, right, when it was put together, Michael Spinks immediately vacated his title. Although he was slated, if he partaken in that heavyweight tournament, he was expected to go last. He would be the last fighter to be fought in that tournament, okay? He was scheduled to fight Tony Tucker, who was the mandatory for that title, the IBF. Instead of negotiating with Tucker, sat down on the table to negotiate a deal, him and Butch Lewis, who was his promoter and manager at the time, decided to opt out and vacate the title, okay? They said they were going to be lowball for offer to take that fight, yada, 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 although they didn't even negotiate an offer. I don't understand how could they say that. All right, Butch Lewis, even in his own admission, said they refused to negotiate. All right, we all knew why. From a common sense standpoint, we all knew why that Michael Spinks, a great fighter that he was, did not want to partake in that tournament. It's not the fact that he was afraid of Tony Tucker. No. It goes beyond that. They all knew that eventually, at some point, sometime, at that tournament, they had to face Mike Tyson, the guy who was the most feared in that division. They did not want to take that fight right now because the reason why, because they were negotiating that fight between Tyson and Spinks for some time. Okay, I think it was in early 1987. Okay, when Spinks walked out of negotiations at one point, right? Then when the negotiations fell flat between him and Tyson to make the fight, they were provoking Tyson during that time when Tyson was collecting the belts and fighting other champions, when he was taking on dangerous, taking on tough opposition, while Michael Spinks wasn't doing it. And people at the time were calling Spinks a coward and being a ducker, why Mike Tyson was the guy who was cleaning up all the dirty work that Spinks didn't want it. This is what people were saying back then, and back in the 80s, okay? All right? And when Spinks' team was arguing the fact that the reason why we didn't want to take that fight between, with Mike Tyson then and now is because they were trying to offer us, the Tyson camp was trying to offer us $2.5 million, $1.5 to $2 million to take the fight in Japan. Okay? And they were arguing that why would we take that fight for $1.5 to $2 million while we can fight in Vegas for $3 million, right? That's what they claimed they wanted. But the fact is, they were calling Mike Tyson a fucking ducker, even though they were the ones who walked out of the negotiations. They were provoking Tyson, and Spinks himself with camp were doing this. They say, well, stop ducking us, man. Make the fight. That's what they were saying. This is what they were saying. But if you ask me, they were provoked. Their whole strategy, when they finally took the Tyson fight, right? After Tyson had beat Larry Holmes and Tony Tubbs, whatnot, when they finally signed on to make that fight happen, which was one of the biggest growing fights in history, right? The fight that everybody wanted to see, when they were, harassing Spinks to take that fight. When Tyson himself wanted that fight, they were harassing Spinks for 2 years to make that fight happen. When it finally got made, Spinks and his camp were provoking Tyson. They knew they couldn't beat him in a technical game, from a technical aspect. Even though Michael Spinks was a very good technical fighter himself, but the only way they felt they could beat Tyson was to get into his head, to break him down psychologically, because we knew Tyson at that time was going through a lot of psychological and personal issues. His altercations with the likes of Mitch Green, with his dispute with his former manager, promoter, and Bill Caden and Jim Jacobs, and then his high-profile marriage and controversial situation with Robin Givens, when she blasted him on live network television on a national audience, that he was being abusive, he was being a very violent man. I mean, did it on live television. I was like, wow. And Mike Tyson sat there right there beside her, and I mean, it's not a funny situation, but you get my point. But the Spinks camp were just using that to provoke Tyson, and obviously that was a bad move. Tyson went in there. We know what happened. He knocked he knocked Spink's head off, obviously, in that fight. I mean, wow. Okay, but anyways, I wanted to point that out. My point is, again, when Michael Spinks moved up, when he was the undisputed lightweight heavyweight champion in the world, when he moved up and fought the lineal heavyweight champion in the world, a fight that people were calling for too, him to fight Larry Holmes. When he won that title, a lot of people expected the expectations of Michael Spinks as the lineal heavyweight champion to defend against all the other top heavyweights, which he didn't really do. So that was the criticism he got. Okay. So, yeah, like, again, this is not a video to show that particularly to the librarian. I know he knows these things. I know you know all these things, but it's just to show you why I'm laying out these points of facts, to show you where I come from as a fan and what all these fighters that I mentioned in earlier in this video, what they went through. I expect the same for the other fighters who become champions to do the same what these fighters went through. Again, if you're going to go ahead and take some voluntary defenses here and there, so be it. That's fine. But the fact is, just be consistent and make sure that you continue to fight top opposition. Get into unification bouts as much as you can. Do those things, okay? That proves your greatness as a fighter, okay? That's what I want, and that's what I asked for, okay? So, it goes back to the point again. It's like, well, why does Anthony Joshua have to go ahead and take on dangerous opposition while Deontay Wilder doesn't? And again, let me repeat my argument. Me and some others do not argue the fact that Deontay Wilder has to do the same as Anthony Joshua. As I stated, is that what I prefer, since that fight cannot happen right away, both of the camps need to get together and make a deal where they get 2 interim fights in between before they finally meet next year. Just like how Michael Spinks and Mike Tyson agreed to an interim fight deal, just like Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson did, even though that didn't happen. And, in 1990, just like Oscar De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad did. So all these things can happen. But the fact is that why does Anthony Joshua have to do it while while Deontay Wilder doesn't? No, like I said, I don't argue that. I've said many times that Deontay Wilder needs to fight opposition ever since he grabbed that belt. Let me tell you something story about this. Before I started uploading videos in early 2015, right? I was in the comment section arguing that, okay, Deontay Wilder now he needs to go fight Vladimir Klitschko. Some of the Deontay Wilder fans was arguing with me against that. They were like, no, that's bullshit. He's not ready for that fight. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Deontay Wilder has 36 pro fights now. 35, whatever the number was. He has 36 pro fights now. He's a champion. Now the standard is high. It has to be set. He needs to go fight Vladimir Klitschko. If he wants to be proven to be a great heavyweight or the top heavyweight, he needs to go fight Vladimir Klitschko. Just like the standard that Tyson was held, just like the standard that Holyfield was held when he captured the belt. And they were arguing like, you don't know shit about boxing. Deontay needs to improve. He needs to improve. I'm like, well, okay, he's a champion now. He's had 36 pro fights. It goes back to my point. What else does he need to improve, I should say? He's a champion. The standards must be set. He needs to fight Vladimir Klitschko. Okay, he needs to try to make a deal. If the fight cannot happen right away, cool. As long as they can get a deal between the two parties, if they agree to interim fights, they will meet eventually at a later date. That's fine with me. But he needs to, take on, tougher opponents in the process. And he hasn't done it. And I criticized him for that. Okay? So, yeah. This just goes to my point that if fighters can do things like Julius Naga go into back-to-back unifications after unifications, like Ricardo Mayorga did it, just like Bernard Hopkins did it, Mike Tyson did it twice when he got out of prison, and he got into immediate unification bout against Bruce Seldon. So those fighters of today can do the same thing, and I believe Anthony Joshua could do the same thing too. But of course, I know that's not going to happen, so I accept that argument. Okay, now I want to bring up Mike Tyson again too, because when he got out of prison, people were calling for him to fight Lennox Lewis. I remember this. People wanted him to fight Lennox Lewis, okay? When he captured the WBC title from Frank Bruno after he beat Buster Mathis Jr. in an title eliminator, right, to position himself as the mandatory challenger, I believe, he got a shot against Frank Bruno, right? When he knocked out Bruno, it knocked him out in a far worse way than he beat Bruno in the first fight back in 1989. People were calling for Tyson to fight Lennox Lewis. And what's so funny about that is some people back then Some people, some of the Tyson fans will argue that no, Mike Tyson needs to unify against Bruce Seldon because that's the fight that people wanted to see next. But majority will argue that Lennox Lewis wanted to get a shot. This is a Lennox Lewis fans, so it's pretty not majority. Let me take that back. It was divided because I was in the chat rooms, in the conversation. People were arguing back and forth that who deserves a title shot at Mike Tyson first, Bruce Seldon or Lennox Lewis. Some people argue Lennox Lewis deserved a shot because he was the mandatory challenger. And then some people argue that Bruce Seldon deserves a shot because that's a unification fight. But ultimately, Mike Tyson paid Lennox Lewis a 7-figure step-aside money to allow him to pursue the unification bout against Bruce Seldon. All right? And in that agreement, Lennox Lewis, between Tyson and Lewis back in 1996, is that once Tyson gets past Bruce Seldon in the unification bout, Lennox Lewis was guaranteed his shot. That was the agreement. So everybody was cool with that, okay? And while Lennox at the same time in turn will take an interim fight in between, so that way he can stay busy. So once Tyson got past Seldon and Lennox got past his interim fight, people were anticipating for the Tyson and Lewis fight to be made. Now, sports writers, commentators, people in the in the chat rooms with the usernames. I was on American Online, AOL at the time, before Google Chrome and all these other social media websites came about. We were all calling for the Lewis Tyson fight to be made. Now that's the fight that needs to be made. We want to see that fight next. Everybody wanted to see that fight next now after Tyson beat Seldon. But what did Tyson do? He vacates the title. He vacates his WBC title, and he got blasted for that, and he was ripped to shreds in the comment section. And there was a big argument, in the chat rooms, and there was a big uproar when he did that, and I was pissed off at Tyson for doing it. Okay, and he was called a coward and a ducker for not fighting Lennox Lewis like he promised that he would do. Okay, and the Duvas came after Tyson for that. They were criticizing him, and they were shocked that he just gives up his title just like that. He didn't even negotiate with Lennox Lewis to take that fight. Instead, he kept his WBA title, vacates his WBC title, and then when he announced that he was going to fight Evander Holyfield, ooh, man, that was the ooh, Tyson got ridiculed for that. And let me tell you something about this. People were arguing the fact that if Tyson wins that fight, people expected Tyson to run through Evander Holyfield. Okay, they expected him to get through Holyfield with ease, because this is a Holyfield who's way past his best, who was coming back from a serious heart condition, who one time they called the paper champion at heavyweight, okay? Who was in 3 grueling fights with Riddick Bowe, who was in tough fights against like a Michael Dokes, Bert Cooper. Who was in tough fight against George Foreman, Larry Holmes. Even though they were past their best, they expected Tyson to run through him with ease, okay? With ease. And me, I was disappointed why Tyson took that fight at the beginning, because I expected him to get through Holyfield with no problem. Okay, I was pissed off that why didn't you go, take that Lennox Lewis fight, because that was a fight everybody wanted to see. And Tyson got ridiculed for that, and he was held to the standard that why the fuck are you ducking? You're a coward. You supposed to be taking on Lennox Lewis, not fucking a way past best Evander Holyfield. No, people didn't want to accept that. And next, what happened? What happened? Evander Holyfield shocked the world as a 25-1 underdog. He shocked the world and beat Mike Tyson, knocked him out. And Tyson at that time was ridiculed for that. They was like, "Oh, you cherry picked a guy you thought you was get through easy who had a serious heart condition, and you did not want to fight Lennox Lewis." And bam, bam, bam. My, had the turntables to turn. Again, it goes back to my point. Once you become a champion, like Tyson did again, you're held to that standard. You need to fight dangerous and prime opposition like Lennox Lewis. And Tyson did not do that. Okay? So, I know I dragged this video out a bit long. I just want to state my point that, again, you don't have to agree with me on this point that once you become a champion, you don't have to be held to a high standard to defend titles against dangerous opposition in an immediate situation, while other fighters have done, which I disagree with that. I proved my point in this video. Hopefully I did. But the thing is that another argument is made is that, again, the Anthony Joshua, he doesn't have to do the things that other champions were never held to, like hundreds of thousands of fighters were not held to that standard. That's great. I understand that argument. I do not agree. I do not argue against that at all. There are many great fighters who were not held to the standard that Anthony Joshua was not held to. I get it. But if you feel that he doesn't have to go through the situation that Ricardo, that Mike Tyson, Oscar De La Hoya, Fernando Vargas, Felix Trinidad, and Evander Holyfield had went through, then fine. That's your opinion. I respect that opinion. But the question, or you feel that unification fights does not have to happen right away while other fighters while thousands of fighters did not have to partake in that situation, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But again, that's your opinion. But again, I can also argue that that has happened before. So I would expect that if other fighters can do it, like Ricardo Mayorga and Evander Holyfield and Julius Ndongo can do, then I would expect other fighters to do the same. Okay? So, again, it goes to my question. If you feel that Anthony Joshua doesn't have to do what those other 5 fighters I just mentioned had done, then I should ask you or anyone else this question. Do you believe that Anthony Joshua could do it? Do you believe he can go through the likes of Luis Ortiz and Kubrat Pulev in his next 2 fights? Do you believe he can do it? I mean, I believe he can do it. Because let me tell you why I believe he can get through Pulev, and I believe he can get through Ortiz or those guys. Let me tell you why I think he can do it. Because the way he handled himself against Vladimir Klitschko, okay, to come back from a knockdown and take a beating in the 5th round. Even though in the 5th round he got the knockdown over Vladimir Klitschko, but towards the end of the round he took a beating, okay, and took a beating in the 6th round, and then started taking some monster shots in the 7th round. But he found the courage and found the heart to come back and battle that situation. And when Anthony Joshua did that, he gained more respect from me, and I believe that he can get through tough opposition in his next 2 fights. I really believe he can do it. And again, I'm gonna repeat myself because some people just have a hard time listening. I think Deontay Wilder has to do the same fucking thing. I've been asking for him to do it for such a long period of time. Yes, he's disappointed me. I've been very disappointed as a champion. But like I said, now that he's still a champion, he still has a career. He still has to prove me wrong. He has to prove all his critics wrong. He still has time to do that. Okay? It's not too late now. He needs to start doing it now. He needs to do it now. No excuses, like I've said. He needs to start doing it now. Okay? So, I thought I really wanted to get my point across here. I just wanted to show you my position on the situation, why I feel that once you become a champion, I hold you to those standards. Just like I've held fighters from the past to the standards, and when they were held to those standards, I hold the fighters from today those same standards as well. I've been very consistent about that. Okay? So, again, I don't argue that Anthony Joshua he's doing a great job. I'm not arguing against that. But again, I have to hold him to the standards like I've held all my favorite fighters to that standard. Even some of the fighters that I look up to today, I hold them to those same standards. So, yeah, I think there's nothing more to be said about this. I know this is a very long video. It was drawn out. So, yeah, let me know what your thoughts about this. Again, this is not to prove who's right and who's wrong here. It's just to prove my position on this situation and how I feel about it by laying out my point of why I believe champions of today, I don't care how long they've been a pro, they can be a pro for 2 years, they can be pro for 4 years, they can be a pro for 3 years, 9 years, doesn't matter. Once you grab that title, the standard is already set for you to start fighting all dangerous, if not formidable, in opposition and other champions. Those standards are set for you. Okay? That's my take on it. And let me know what your thoughts about this. I'm out.